Welcome back, everyone. Our next talk, as I mentioned before, is Brinks and ManageXR from pilot to scale. We have Mark Stauffer and Luke Wilson here with us today. And I'm your host, Clay Walsh. I've been here all day, and I'm ready to sit down. So we're doing it. We've got a couple more. It's just been an amazing, this room has been on fire today. So thank you so much. Mark has been involved in the digital learning space since 1995 when he received his MS in Instructional Technology degree. A year later, he was awarded a Brandon Hall Gold Medal for innovative design of a CD-ROM-based training program. Since then, he's always enjoyed exploring and incorporating the latest learning technologies available for any training project assigned to him. He is currently using his latest passion, virtual reality, to develop immersive training solutions for Brinks FrontLine employees. And Luke Wilson has worked in XR since 2015. In 2018, Luke founded Mighty Immersion with the intention of using immersive technologies to improve patient care while working to deploy thousands of headsets to over 200 hospitals working across the US. Luke realized there was a fundamental scale boundary in XR deployment. How do we remotely sync, update, and control thousands of devices and streamline the end user experience? This problem led Luke to build ManageXR, an XR management tool for business. So we're going to bring up these two and let them take the stage. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, hey everyone. Thank you for the introduction. That was the first minute of my talk. So my name's Luke, CEO and founder of ManageXR. Today we are talking about how Brinks has scaled their use of VR to train hundreds of frontline employees. I'm thrilled to be joined by Mark Stauffer of the Brinks team. They've led this amazing initiative creating VR employee training, and I won't talk too much about the work that he has done, but we helped them scale their deployment to over nearly 500 devices in over 70 different locations. So we'll start with Mark telling you about how they got to this point.
Thanks so much, Luke, and thanks everybody for having us here today. So I want to tell you a little bit about Brinks and what we're doing with VR. I work for a group within Brinks called the Brinks Global Learning, and what we are tasked with doing, Brinks has offices and branches all throughout the world. Most of you may know the Brinks in the United States with the armored trucks. We do cash logistics, and we have a lot of employees, not only in the US, but all across the world. And Brinks Global Learning, we're charged with not only training people within the United States, but also in many, many countries. So a few years ago, and this is way before I started working for Brinks, this group was tasked with creating frontline employee training. And what they decided to do, because they didn't really know about the VR technology at the time, they thought, well, we'll do on-the-job training. But when you think about it, if you have a seasoned employee who knows their job very well, and they're up at an ATM outside, obviously they are armed, they're wearing a bulletproof vest, but they have this ATM open, and there's a lot of cash in those ATMs. How are they supposed to focus on training employees that are brand new and need to know every little piece of information? So they quickly realized that this is going to be a huge security risk. So what do we do to train? Well, we could create e-learnings. We could give them PDF files. We could give them sheets with step-by-step instructions. But these are very complicated machines, and a lot of other things that Brinks trains are very complicated procedures. So they realized that this was not going to be a great option. And at the time, this is probably going back about 3 years ago or so, video-based VR was becoming a thing as far as the training and development world was considered. And so they started kind of exploring, how can we do VR training? So what they did, they partnered with a lot of different SMEs within the business to figure out what they wanted to train on. And they didn't really know how to build the VR. So this is kind of where I come in. I was at a conference back in 2018, very close to here, called Realities 360. And I have two light bulb moments in my life when it comes to VR training. This was the first one. I went to this conference, I went to the expo floor, I went to a company, and it was the very first time I ever put a VR headset on. Had no idea what I was in for. And it was a training piece and it was a training piece on how to make a latte. And honestly, it completely changed my life because I realized at that point, I've been doing e-learning for years and building courses. But once I put that headset on and I was immersed into that scene, I knew that the training would be taken to a different level. So I absolutely fell in love with VR. I knew I could build it. I just had to figure out how. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a couple of the lessons that we've learned at Brinks, and they've learned before I even got there, honestly. The people in the training department, they were like me. They were designing e-learning courses. So things that you would use on your laptop or your tablet or what have you. It's a completely different way to train, though, than it is when you're designing for VR. VR is very spatial, as we all know. You have to understand you're standing in the middle of something, of some world, and you need to understand how to write the storyboards for that, how to tell your story, what you want to get across as far as training goes. So they brought me on board to actually help them develop some of these courses as a prototype. And the first thing I showed them was, okay, you need to take your storyboards that you're writing training for and change them a little bit. Yes, we still need to know the objectives of the course. We still need to know what the narration is going to be, things like that. But because we're shooting this in 360 video, we also need to know what cameras we're using, where those cameras are going to be placed, what else is going to be placed in your 360 environment. So I kind of combined a storyboard from a traditional e-learning with elements of a video script. And then I also added this part over here to show that the center dot there is a person wearing a VR headset. And we can now place within that circle everything that they're going to see. So we can show what's directly in front of them when they first put the goggles on. We can show things behind them. We can show their field of view. And this has made a huge advance in the way we're able to write these storyboards now, because not only can we read what's happening on them, but we can also visually see them. So from that storyboard, this is our first prototype that we started to develop. There I am with a camera. It's a little GoPro. Whoops, sorry. Let's go back to that. It's a little GoPro Max 360 camera, great little camera for doing these. And you can see we have a truck in front of us. There's a building behind us that the driver of that truck is going to walk into. So as he walks, you can just spin around and see him enter the building. So on this side, this was all shot in 360, but we also use that same camera in 180 mode. And this gentleman was a manager that we were putting up on the screen to give feedback when the user answered a question within the VR. So we used the same camera, we just shot it as 180 video instead of 360 video, and then we superimposed it over top of the 360. So this was my second light bulb moment at that conference, because not only was I introduced to VR at that conference, but I saw a tool there called Scenario VR, and it used to be made by a company called Trivantis. They've since been bought out. But it was a tool that allowed me, who had no programming experience or anything, to develop video-based VR. It was a tool that was very familiar to me because it looked a lot like some of the tools I was developing e-learning with. It had frames over, oops, sorry, I keep hitting that button. Had frames over here where I could drop things into. I could put little markers along my timeline here to have it do certain things. So I could add things to this like hotspots and questions and other things. And it was a great tool. And up until that point, I had never realized that I could actually design this myself. So I started using Scenario VR. I took that to Brinks, told them, this is what I think you should use. So now we had to get leadership buy-in. So we decided, okay, we're going to go with the Scenario VR app. We had to pick a headset. At the time, the Oculus Go was the thing, especially for 360 video VR. So we went with the Oculus. Everybody loved it. We showed legal, we showed HR, we showed executives, and we actually got the green light to go ahead and produce our first course. Now, one of the other things that they've learned is that you don't want to use VR for everything that you want to teach. Obviously, with an ATM, they're very complicated. I don't want to have to put the specs of an ATM in a VR. I can put that in a PDF or some other form. I don't have to put necessarily all the software things of an ATM. I can put that in an e-learning. What I do need to put in there is how to change the paper, because you want to see them slide that rack out and actually do the paper changing procedure and all the little knobs and buttons you have to push to do that. You want to see how to take the cash boxes out, things like that. So the things that are dangerous, the things that are hard to replicate on site, that's what you put in VR. And they realized very early on, because the people that were our SMEs wanted everything in these VR courses. And we said, number one, it's going to cost a lot more to produce that. And number two, people are just going to get bored with that training, because a lot of that stuff doesn't need to be in the VR. So just make sure that you know that you don't want to put everything into your training. Put what's intended for VR in the VR and leave everything else outside of that. Here's where we really started to learn our lessons. So we started to develop our first pilot. Like I said, we had chosen the Oculus Go. Great little all-in-one headset. It had good quality. It was widely used at the time. This is my, expressway here. We were all set to develop this great VR. But then we hit a roadblock. And we ended up having to go down this little country road here. Between the time that I created the pilot for them, or the prototype, I should say, and the time that we started to create this first pilot is when Oculus got bought out by Facebook. And as soon as I put that headset on, as I was developing the pilot and showed it to them, and it required a Facebook login, they're like, there is no way in the world that Brinks is going to allow you to use Facebook logins because of the security risks that are involved. So we immediately had to come up with a second plan. Brinks uses a lot of iPhones. A lot of their employees have iPhones as company phones. So we thought, okay, let's go with an iPhone. Let's pick the 12 because, it's the latest and greatest at the time. We'll stick it in one of those plastic VR goggles. That should be good, nice and rugged. And we'll use Google Cardboard, the API, to do this. It should be, almost as good as the Oculus, maybe a little bit less. But at least we have the phones available. We can procure those and get them sent out to all our branches. We should be good to go. Another problem we had, though, with this first pilot, we tried to make video VR kind of be like, 3D rendered VR. What they wanted was to see the VR from the aspect of the messenger. So in other words, the person wearing the headset was the one that you could see your hands out in front of you, things like that. But first of all, they didn't have the budget to do generated VR. And it would just be too much for them to try to build it, especially for this pilot. So what we thought, let's do it this way. We'll put the camera on the guy's head, right? Why not? It'll make, when he puts his hands out in front of him, it'll make the user of the VR think, oh, that's my hands or whatever. We actually put gloves on them. So depending on your race, you didn't see, different color hands. If you were male or female, it didn't matter. You were wearing gloves. I thought this was great. And I didn't really think much about it at first. I thought, maybe this isn't going to work. But then I looked at it on my laptop and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. This looks fabulous. It's exactly what they wanted. Right, until we hit that huge pothole in the road. I put the goggles on for the first time after all this video was shot, and I almost lost my lunch immediately. So the lesson that was learned here, always shoot your 360 video from a fixed location, i.e. a tripod, whether it's on a floor, whether it's on a desk, whether you have it hanging from a ceiling, I don't care. Just make sure that VR, or that camera is stable, okay? Now, for later projects, what we ended up doing, we still wanted that experience of having the hands out in front. And we were trying to think, okay, how can we do that? So what we ended up doing is using a second camera. This camera, it's the same one we use for 360, but this one is set to 180 mode. And it's attached to, these guys are called messengers. It's attached to the messenger's bulletproof vest. And what we resulted from that was, this image, the main image, is all the 360 VR where you can turn around and see everything. But then we superimposed the 180 image over top of that and completely synced them together using a video editing tool. And now, when this runs, everything that he does down here is in perfect sync with what he's doing up here. We can also put things like what's on the scanner up here so you can see, what he's looking at more clearly. So this has become a really useful way to do our VR. Okay, fourth lesson that we learned. I'll try to go through this a little quickly here. We had the iPhone 12s, we were using the goggles, we were using Google Cardboard, and we hit a really major roadblock and detour. The iPhone 12s failed the pilot. Now, we didn't have a way to test the 12s. It was a long story, but we couldn't get them to our branches quick enough. So we tested on every other iPhone. I tested on a 6 and it worked great. I tested on an 8, we tested on a 10. Everything was working great. We thought we were set. The problem was Apple decided to change or not support Google Cardboard anymore. So the course would run for about 3 minutes and then completely lock up, and you couldn't use it. You had to reboot the phone. So we were like, great, now what do we do? At that time, I read an article, some VR production company, I don't even remember who the company was, but at the end of the article, they recommended these Pico goggles. I had never heard of them before. So I looked them up, we got a couple demos sent in, and absolutely fell in love with these goggles. They are very similar to the Oculus. There's no security risk at all because there's no login. And this company, Pico, only sells to enterprise. So it was a perfect match for us. The thing I really like about these goggles, and I'm sure Oculus is probably doing it by this point, but they put their battery on the back strap. So they were much more comfortable to wear than my Oculus headset was. So that's what we ended up going with. So what we learned here, if at all possible, and we didn't have this luxury, but if at all possible, test and retest on whatever deployment device you're going to be using at the time. You'll save yourselves a lot of hassle. Okay, so this is our journey so far. We had our first pilot. We did 5 locations, probably had about, 20 headsets or so. This one completely failed because that's when we were trying to use the iPhones. Second pilot, we got 4 more locations with a total of 45 Pico devices. This one went fabulous. Everybody loved it. Our rating went way down here and way up on this one. And because this one went so well, we ended up getting 430 additional Pico devices and launched our training to 10 different regions. So we're using Pico, but this is where Luke comes in. We also use ManageXR to handle all of the deployment of these devices. And this is a little bit of what ManageXR looks like. I'll let Luke get into this a little bit more. But this allows us, as an organization, you can see all of our branches listed here, and we have 5 devices in each branch. It'll tell you things like battery life of each device, what's on each device, who's using each device. It even shows you approximately where those devices are located. So if you are deploying to large numbers of headsets, I strongly recommend getting something like ManageXR to handle all of those devices. At this point, I will hand it back to Luke.
Thank you. Nice. All right. Well, that was a good introduction to ManageXR. I want to talk a little bit about device management and how we were able to help Brinks get to this point. When we were introduced to Brinks earlier this year, right before their 45 device pilot, they really had one main question, and that was, how do we run a successful pilot? And how do we make sure that that can grow to a full-scale rollout once we have some success? So let's talk about this playbook. Brinks went from 0 to 45 devices, and then from 45 to 475. And from our point of view, there are 3 really key components to making a successful VR deployment happen. Once you have a team that's ready to rock and roll, right? That's the first foundational level. The 3 key points that you need to solve after that. First is your content. For Brinks, they had built all of their content in-house, as you heard. They used a tool called Scenario VR, helped stitch that together. So that was pretty much solved by the time that we talked to Brinks. The second key component is hardware. So as you learned, there was quite a journey for Brinks to end up landing on what is our preferred hardware, Pico. It's super common for people to start with an Oculus device because that's what is the largest player in the market right now. But nearly all of our customers, the moment they try to scale in any significant way, they realize that they can't do so with Oculus for a variety of reasons. And we always are pointing our customers towards Pico because their hardware is fantastic. They offer a 3DoF and a 6DoF headset, no logins required, and they're really designed for these types of business use cases. So once they had the Pico hardware selected, the final component is management. And from our point of view, this is really the glue that brings your content, your software, and your hardware all together. And this is where ManageXR comes in. So with these three components for this deployment, we were able to very quickly and easily scale Brinks from a 45 device deployment to 475 devices. And typically that jump can be a complete deal killer or a massive hurdle. So I want to talk about the questions that you need to be thinking about if you are thinking about scaling a VR deployment. The first question is, how are you going to set up all of your devices? So if you're running a pilot locally, you can set up 5 devices, no problem. You're going to be there in person most likely, and it's not an issue to go through a couple device setup processes. But if you're talking about 500 devices, it's a completely different story. So that's a problem that you do need to solve when you're thinking about large scale. The next problem is, how are you going to get your end users into these devices efficiently? This is one where it's easy for us as implementers to overlook the fact that VR is very new, and your end users have probably never used VR before. So there are hurdles there where you're in person, you are able to walk people through using this device for the first time in a pilot situation, but at scale you aren't there, and you need to be able to make sure that this program of yours can run without you being present. And finally, how are you going to update those devices when you have new content or new updates or anything like that? And this is really, as an organization, when you're putting an investment in a lot of hardware, you should also be thinking about not only this pilot that you're about to run, but what happens next. And so it's always important to be thinking about the management of these devices at large scale. And once they are out of your hands and across the country or the world. So for this Brinks deployment, the way that we were able to answer these questions, first and foremost, when we're talking about setting up devices, ManageXR is actually preloaded on all of Pico devices in the US. And for this particular deployment, we were able to work with the Pico team to have all of Brinks software and everything fully loaded into their devices before those devices were ever shipped to Brinks. So this is huge, right? Brinks didn't have to go through this massive setup process. They had 475 devices arrive on their doorstep ready to go. The second piece is getting your end users into VR efficiently. For this, we use the ManageXR home screen, which essentially is a kiosk mode for your device that replaces these home screen environments that can be otherwise really confusing and easy to get lost in. So for Brinks, they've got their own branding, their own logos, and a single button that gets them into the app that their trainees need to get to. This makes using that headset a lot easier and a lot less of this dance of handing the headset back and forth because you're getting lost. And this final piece is, how are you going to get these devices updated? And this is the core of our platform at ManageXR. It's our device management. So as Mark had mentioned, you register a device into the ManageXR platform. You're able to track everything about it remotely, pushing out content and things like that. So if you've got any questions about how you are managing devices at scale or any questions about deployment, please come talk to us at ManageXR. We've got a lot of people and a lot of software that's designed just for this, and we love talking about it.
All right. Big round of applause for Mark and Luke.